This is Brooks Carter, and we have another Human Development and Leadership Division webinar. This one is Leading Through Conflict, Collecting, Collaborating, and Innovating Across Generations. Presenters are two good friends of mine, Carolann Wolfgang, Dr. Wolfgang. Carolann is very accomplished in two fields, in safety and quality. She is, well, she's continuous improvement director of a naval unit that is such a long acronym that I'll never get it right.
Carolann, why don't you say where you work?
It's NAVFAC Engineering and Expeditionary Warfare Center.
Oh, of course.
something most of us are familiar with. Carolann and I have one thing in common that's interesting. We both went to Penn, University of Pennsylvania. She is an undergraduate, and me some years before to graduate school. Marilyn I've known for about 30 years. Marilyn is a mathematical statistician. She studied under Deming. She served as Deming's assistant at a number of his 4-day seminars. She is an executive level consultant and very accomplished consultant at that. Her education is at Baylor University. She has a master's degree in I believe it's biological statistics. So I wasn't expecting to introduce the ladies this morning, but I'm happy to, and I'm going to pass the podium to Monda Sturm, who's going to talk a little bit about our division.
Hi, Wanda. Wanda, by the way, everyone, is the chairperson for HD&L.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooks, and thank you, Marilyn. I just want to introduce a little bit about our division before we get started with this. This is an exciting topic for us, and part of the reason that is an exciting topic is because our vision is to be the global community of choice for everyone by making human potential an organizational and personal priority. And then our mission is to enrich the personal and professional lives of our membership and the global community to triumph over current and future challenges. And conflict has always been a challenge, and looking at conflict in different perspectives is also a challenge for us today, specifically when we look at across generations, because we have so many generations that are alive and well and working in our workplace and also in our communities. And if you want to find out more about us, you can find that out at our website. The website is listed here. It's www.asqhdandl.org. And we would love to have you as a member as well of our division if you are not currently a member, and you can do that by contacting ASQ Customer Care. One of the things that we have been working on, and that is critical to the success of the division, is our body of knowledge. And Brooks is actually the one that's leading our body of knowledge effort. And the leadership body of knowledge consists of the resources that are related to topics that we have discovered through our research, our time and effort, and our experience to be essential to the personal pursuit of leadership excellence. And you will see those topics listed below. You'll note that it begins with visioning because it's very important for leaders to have a vision. And then there's also other aspects of leadership excellence that are critical. And on the right-hand side, you will see the second one listed as conflict management. And so what we're trying to do is offer to you some knowledge that you can take forward, apply, be able to collaborate with others and be able to innovate as well across not only generations but with one another as you are engaging and enacting during the community work that you do or either during your professional work. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Marilyn and Carolann, and thank you guys so much for developing this opportunity.
Yeah, this is Brooks. One other housekeeping thing. If you have questions, type them into the question box, and we will likely deal with them at the end. It's possible we would interrupt with a question if it seemed appropriate, but we'll probably deal with questions at the end. So feel free to type in any questions that you have.
Thanks, Brooks, for that reminder. We appreciate it. I do want to mention that I'm getting a wicked lag from when I'm turning the page to when the page shows up. So just a little patience as we deal with this lovely technology that allows us to connect, but sometimes is a little finicky. So I think that, and thank you so much, Brooks and Wanda both, for talking about both HD&L and our backgrounds. And Carolann, I was wondering if you might want to say a few more words in particular about your background as a specialist in conflict.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. As Wanda was saying, we deal with conflict in throughout our lives and in all situations. And my situation with conflict began when I was doing my PhD in natural resources management, realizing really quickly that my problem was not collecting the technical data, but dealing with the stakeholders and really dealing with an emotional topic such as limited water resources. And so I started in my mediation training journey at that time, and since then I've taken 3 different types of mediation training and styles, and really seeing conflict from that point of view, that it's okay to be in conflict. We can have opportunity come out of conflict, and it really informs my time today, my work in terms of innovation, and seeing that it can also help innovation. So conflict, from my point of view, is something we can get through, and I have a lot of hope to get through it for myself and my colleagues, and especially. And so my training in mediation and also in coaching has really formed my way forward with this topic.
Thanks, Carolann. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Today we're going to talk first about generational conflict, and you'll learn about different generations that are populating our workshop today, and we're going to discuss what characterizes them and causes them to come into conflict. We'll discuss stereotypes, and we'll talk a little bit about whether they are based in fact or not, which is kind of interesting. And then next, we're going to turn to the concept of conflict itself. We'll discuss different conflict models and how you can choose the way in which you might want to lead through conflict. And finally, we're going to take some time to talk to you about our retreat, which is called Leading Through Conflict. We're very excited about our inaugural offering in January, and it's being co-sponsored by the Trinidad 5-Star Quality and Justice Association, which means we get to go to a very interesting location to practice some of these conflict skills. Hopefully you'll like what you see when we talk about the workshop, and you'll want to attend yourself. So let's start out by finding out a little bit about you. Where are you all from? We have 9 people, small audience today. This is the 3rd time we've offered this webinar. So could you type in where you're from? Are you from Trinidad, or are you from the U.S.? What city do you live in? Any kind of, you could just type right into the question box, and that way everyone can see. Oh, Omaha, that's lovely. That's where where my friend, my financial wizard friend is from, right? Warren Buffett. Texas, I lived in Texas for a while, Nevada, excellent. It looks like we're sprinkling the U.S. with our attendees today. Thanks a lot. Now, the next thing I'm curious about is what generation you're from. And I'm going to launch a poll here. So I'm going to ask you, once this poll comes up, to click on the generation that applies to you. And you can see that they're defined by age group. So hopefully you can take a second and click in here. I'm seeing Generation X and baby boomers. Let's see. And
looks like there's a spread, Marilyn.
oh, there's some millennials popping in. That's excellent.
Yep.
We've got about half of the people voting. And let's see. Let me go ahead and at 67%, I'm going to close this and share it so that you guys can see what the results look like. And I think this is, you know, oh, look, it's like about a third, and a third. Isn't that interesting? With 67% in. So thank you for that. I think you're going to, hopefully you'll be able to find some interesting new information about all of these different generations. One of the things I wanted to point out to everyone is what do the generations look like in the workforce today? And this chart, I really like this chart because it shows who is in the workforce by generation. And you can see at the very front in 2015 that there are about the same amount of boomers and millennials in the workplace right now. The silent generation, the older generation, is at a lower influence in the workplace, but they're still there and their presence is felt. And one of the things that, and you can see Gen X is a little bit lower, but what you're going to see as time goes on is the millennials actually taking over the workplace as the boomers age out and Gen X ages out. I think that there is and there will be age diversity in the workforce for the next decade. But given that, why is it that relating across the generations is sometimes not very easy? I love this quote for an interesting reason. This quote, because all the people of the world are part of one electronically based intercommunicating network, young people everywhere share a kind of experience that none of the elders ever had. The break between generations is wholly new, it's planetary, and it's universal. And what's ironic about this quote is that, not that it came from Margaret Mead, she's a very famous cultural anthropologist, but that it was written in 1970. And so these are things that these are issues that have been around for a long time. Now the generational issues get a lot of press. So use your hand raise if you have ever seen any of these generational issues. Issues around feedback, business etiquette, dismissive attitudes, work hour conflicts, different kinds of issues around work-life balance. And I can see lots of hands going up, Carolann. I think that we're not the only ones seeing these, that this is something that happens in the workplace at large. So I think this study is particularly relevant that Wiener and Rasch did this year. And they looked at 2,500 executives, and they found a quarter of them consider intergenerational conflict to be a top risk. And so whether or not generational issues are true, If execs are worried, you're going to see these things coming up in the workplace time and time again. So let's look at some of these stereotypes that are rampant in the press, and maybe you've experienced some of them personally. The first one is that baby boomers are out of touch and cut off from what's happening in the world. And guess what? The research shows this to be false. Compared to boomers, millennials were less likely to have donated to charities, less likely to want a job worthwhile to society or that would help others, and they're less likely to agree they would eat differently if it meant more food for the starving. This comes from research from Jean Twenge, who's a famous writer in generational issues. She works in the psychology department at San Diego State University. Another stereotype is that millennials want more interesting work. Again, the research has shown this to be false. Actually, what recent research has been shown by Gallup, that actually what millennials want more than interesting work is accountability. Gallup called this the most surprising result of their studies. And they also found that millennials were most engaged when they were accountable. So think about this as you look at your workplace, whether you're a millennial or whether you're managing a millennial, how accountable are you allowing these young people in the workplace to be for their work? Or are you using them just as arms and legs? Another stereotype, millennials want more work-life balance, and the research shows this to be somewhat true. Overall, the dominant definition for work-life balance was enough leisure time for private life, followed by flexible work hours and recognition and respect. This comes from Universum. Twenge, in her research, did see a slight rise in how much millennials value work-life balance. However, she says that while Generation X and the millennials placed greater emphasis on leisure time, this is probably attributable to the fact that they're just younger and they have more of a social life than some of the older generations do. Another stereotype, millennials want more purpose at work. And this was found to be true. Purpose and development drive millennials much more than entitlements. That's good news. So you don't have to worry about the ping pong tables, lattes, and the free food, says Gallup from their 2016 research. Gallup has also found little or no differences in generations in what attracts job seekers to a prospective workplace. Specifically, 62% of millennial job seekers said interesting work is important, compared to 52% of Gen X and 60% of baby boomers. Now, when you talk about the difference in percentages of 62 to 60%, this is something you see a lot. This might be a statistical difference, but is it really a practical one? Are we more alike than what the data might lead us to believe when you consider just statistical differences? The next stereotype I want to talk about is Gen Xers are more ambitious. And again, the research is finding this not to be true. Actually, a recent study conducted by IBM Institute found millennials are not that different from their older colleagues. For example, the same percent of millennials, 25%, want to make a positive impact on their organization as Gen Xers, which came in at 21%, and baby boomers, which came in at 23%. So 25, 23, 21%. Again, while these are statistical differences, are they really practical ones? Are these generations more alike than they are different? Here's another stereotype, that millennials are less positive at work. And again, this has shown to be false. The Hay Group studied over 5 million employees worldwide and found millennials are less positive at work, but even the biggest difference between the generations is just 5 percentage points. Are millennials more disengaged? Guess what? False. I like this particular table, which came out of the Gallup surveys. And you can see, look at this first line. Who is most engaged? 29% of the millennials say they're engaged at their work. 32 of Gen Xers, 33 of baby boomers, 45 of the silent generation. And really, is there that much of a difference between 29% and 33%? I think this number is dismal. I think that engagement at levels of 30% is really alarming. And I think it's an entirely different problem than a generational one. Excuse me. Baby boomers are more independent and need less supervision. That stereotype has also been disproved. All employees need coaching. They just want it in different ways. The Xers and the boomers want more peer coaching and mentoring, whereas millennials prefer frequent touch-based feedback. And they tend to want to learn how to better play to their strengths as opposed to exploring development opportunities. And finally, the last stereotype I want to talk about is they're completely different from us, that is other generations, at that age. And the research, again, has shown this stereotype not to be true. So fundamentally, all generations want the same thing, a workplace they can thrive in. That comes from Gallup. A meta-analysis of 20 studies found small to moderate differences in generation work attitudes. And Peter Capelli from Wharton School has said there is no serious evidence there's a generational differences. Sure, older generations might look at millennials and think they're not like them. Well, of course they're not like them. They're older and they're in a different place in their life. So young people are always different than older people in the workforce. And they don't have the same kind of obligations. Really what we want to focus on as we think about the generations is not how they're different, but how they're the same. And how can we promote intrinsic motivation so as to raise engagement among them? How do we provide all generations with more autonomy, with the ability to do better at their work and a purpose for doing their work? And this is kind of summing things up. I think you can see as you look at this chart how closely in the percentages the three generations are clustered. You can see the blue is the baby boomers, the green are the Gen Xers, the orange is the millennials. And while there are some differences perhaps, I think it's more alike. So as you hear about these stereotypes, ask yourself, do the authors have any data? The people who are promoting these stereotypes have any data? Or are they just telling anecdotal data, experiences? Are the differences truly generational, or is it just life stage? And I think that some of this conflict, it just really comes down to stereotyping, which no one likes. No one likes it, no matter what generation you're in.
Marilyn, we do have a number of questions. I was wondering if we should take a look at those before we move on.
Sure, Carolann, go ahead.
Just in case they're dealing with generations. Can you see those easily on your pane?
I actually am not seeing them at all.
Okay, let me see if I can bring them up here.
I'm not seeing them either.
Okay,
I
maybe
the responses from when I asked them where they were. But
well, that's okay. I think it's just showing on my pane. Well, sorry about that. That's fine.
No, that's
we
quite
can
right.
Move on.
That's quite right. Okay, so Carolann, I think maybe I'll hand it off to you to talk a little bit about the definition of generational conflict.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. Well, good morning, everyone. The sun is just coming up where I'm at, and so it's another lovely day here in Southern California. On this slide, Marilyn and I thought a lot about how to define or make a working definition of generational conflict, solving conflict in general, and how do we say that. And while I know I've been successful at moving through conflict myself, and I have hope for that for us in the future, that nobody said it was easy, and it isn't easy. It does take intent and commitment. And so we wanted to make a point on this slide to say, you know, we have to commit to it, just like we commit to leadership and learning leadership and going on a leadership journey. Our working definition is here also, and it says it's a personal commitment to engage in the right dialogue to find a creative, sincere solution that's better than what either party could come up with on their own. So that's the first part of that, recognizing that usually when we put our heads together, we can actually come up with something even better than we think about as an individual, right? The second piece of that follows on says, it allows parties to either build greater rapport or to achieve a relationship that meets both interests. So what that is a decision point. If I want to build greater rapport with someone, I'm going to want to get through a conflict together with them. There may be a case where I don't necessarily want greater rapport, but I have interests as part of the relationship, and the other party has interests in that relationship too, and it has to keep going. It's not a relationship that's going to end anytime soon for whatever reason. So that last piece in the definition is, you know, you're just trying to get through conflict to achieve a relationship that does meet what you want to get out of it or what you need to get out of it and what the other party needs to get out of it. We'll talk a little bit later about intractable conflicts and the point that you don't need to throw yourself into every conflict. We're not saying that. So, but it's a decision about whether you want to engage or not, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Marilyn, can you pull up the next slide?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So we have another poll, our second poll, and the question is, what is your experience with conflict training and negotiation? We just wanted to see how much training you had, if you did have it. There's a lot of different kinds of training out there, and certainly there's a lot of books out there about this topic and different concepts, so we wanted to poll you on that question. And there's answers coming in now. Just give it another few seconds.
Okay, I think I'll let everybody see the results.
Okay, so many of you have had training in it and or have done some reading about it, so that's great. What I noticed early on in my own training as a scientist, and something I noticed with other people, is we don't really get trained in this unless, again, we go out to do it ourselves, or we really, you know, we see the need in it and we go out and get training or start reading books ourselves about the topic. So, okay. So in the next slide, what we'll see is this question, you know, can we do this? Can we actually move past the stereotypes that Marilyn was talking about? And so we say yes, yes we can. And some of the points on this go through these facts. Understanding generational differences and the stereotypes and options you have to engage in conflict. This is one of the tools that you will have to understand what you could do if you do get into conflict. You don't have to necessarily avoid conflict all the time. You don't necessarily have to run away from conflict or engage in a particular way. There are options for engagement that we'll be discussing. The second point on this slide talks about the commitment again, and it's certainly something that that I've been doing. I know, especially as we've been, Marilyn and I have been working on this topic, and I go back to my own workplace and look around, and sometimes when you're talking about a topic or thinking about it, you start noticing more on that topic around you, and I've certainly seen stereotypes, around me, and have experienced that. And so it's being more aware of the stereotypes, and another renewed commitment to say, I'm not going to have a stereotype about these people, or I'm going to work on that. I'm going to chip away at that for myself. The third point is about learning conflict styles and how you react in conflict. So there is a conflict measurement tool out there, like some of you might have done, say Myers-Briggs or DISC, some other leadership type of exploration or tool, measurement tool, and there is a tool out there to measure the different styles we have in conflict. We can be accommodators, we can be compromisers, so to speak. There are different ways that we naturally deal with conflict. None of those ways are wrong necessarily. It's just how we balance the different conflict styles in different situations. Again, kind of like situational leadership, what we choose to use in that particular situation. So this point speaks to learning, self-awareness, really. And that's the first step on how we're talking about leading through conflict and a roadmap through conflict. This is the first step on that journey, or on that roadmap, is the self-awareness. So building your roadmap, that's the roadmap that encompasses, starting out in self-awareness, encompasses some tools that you can use and options, and continuing on that journey for as long as you can to build better dialogue and learn how to deal with conflict. Prep and respond is part of the roadmap. Prepping, making a plan for conflict. So this was really something that came out of Harvard and other universities and researchers who were looking at negotiation particularly, and how to prep for negotiation. And so if you've heard of the term BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement, these kind of things came out where as part of the planning, whereby you sit and really look at, what do you want? What are you trying to get out of this? What do you think the other person or the other group wants? What do you think they are interested in? What do you think their constraints are? These kind of planning events, or worksheets that you can do before your conflict, they're pretty comprehensive. They take a while to do. So those of you who have facilitated meetings out there, I know Marilyn is a facilitator as well, I'm a meeting facilitator, you realize that planning before the event usually takes you a lot longer than the actual meeting time, and it's the same with conflict and conflict planning. It can take a few hours or longer to think about the conflict and really raise awareness. And what has happened time again, I mean, this is a simple concept really, but what happens time again with myself and others who I know on this same journey is that it brings out much more about what they want. They think they know what they want, but when you really sit down and try to plan this, that it comes out much more clearly for you. And that's a strength. That's a way to go into the conflict in a nice, strong place or position. Practicing conflict, the last point there, we talk about collaborative negotiation tools, and this is how we see conflict in terms of a collaboration, right? We'll talk about the difference between collaborative and non-collaborative here in a minute, but practicing is something that Marilyn and I will go through quite a bit of time with in our retreat, and we recognize as part of this roadmap. It's well, it's similar to PDCA and that cycle where we're just we're on the road and we're going to be practicing. We're going to be learning, practice again and learn. And these practice points can be very minor things, can be very minor. Let me take a look and self-assess, self-assess myself as to how I handle this particular point. Or it could be practicing and with a really much more difficult conflict. So though there are a lot of different training types out there on conflict, what we like to see is a training that offers a very much practice during the actual training event. So we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of our retreat coming up. The next slide talks about common ground. Maybe you've heard of common ground. It's a little bit of a subtle topic. Sometimes it's quite overlooked in terms of its importance. Common ground is simply, what do you yourself have in common with the person or the group you're in conflict with? I've had situations where people say, I have nothing in common with that person. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. You can't make me find something in common with this other person. Well, believe it or not, 100% of the time I have found there's something that you have in common with the other person or party. And so common ground is just such an extremely useful tool to remember, either in team conflicts or in individual conflicts, where, if I stand back with people to say, look, do you think we have anything in common here? What do you think we have that you see is in common? I ask these questions, and usually I'm coming up with, if I'm facilitating or mediating, I'm coming up to prompt what I see as something that's common ground. There's a lot of common ground in what Marilyn talked about earlier when she was describing these generations. And so the generations are defined on the left there of the slide. And on the right, I've listed these commonalities. So no matter what, we are human. Doesn't matter what generation we're in, we want interesting work. We want something great to do. We all want to be happy. We want to have fun. We want to thrive, and we want opportunities. So there are a few people who don't want these things, I guess, in the world, and they don't want to necessarily be engaged. But the majority of us all do, and the majority of people at your workplace do. And so it would be interesting in terms of practicing to go back into your workplaces to remember, if the millennial, for example, is showing up at 10 a.m., a few days in a row, the stereotype of that could be, oh, look at that millennial, they don't really have the same work ethic that I do as a baby boomer. I am showing up at 7 a.m. every morning. Start thinking about, well, maybe there's something going on with that person. I know that that person does want to be engaged at work, and start pushing yourself out of the stereotype thinking. That's what we all do. That's what I do, and sometimes I have to do it every day, right? We're all human. But this list of commonalities is helpful to remind us all how, no matter what, generations don't make a difference in terms of us really wanting basic things in life, right? So we've called this webinar Leading Through Conflict, and we talked a little bit about a roadmap. And Marilyn and I are both process people. We're in the quality field, and so we see this very much like a process. And we can talk about that a little bit more too in a second here. But we call this Leading Through Conflict because we've kind of moved beyond, resolving conflict. There's a lot of discussion about conflict resolution. And for us practitioners in the conflict area, we see it more as conflict exploration, right? Sometimes you don't actually resolve a conflict, and we don't want to put pressure on people to think that you can resolve all the conflicts, but you can explore conflict. And for a lot of people, that just makes a difference for themselves and how they view conflict. And so we're saying several points on this slide. Know your options to have the discussion that you can diffuse an issue or stereotype just enough so you can find your interests. What we're saying there is that, again, you have different collaborative tools available and options in how you deal with conflict. You don't need to be stuck in conflict. Leading through conflict is also about helping you through complexity in the workplace. So there is a lot of discussion in the ASQ about innovation. Marilyn, Brooks, and I were just at an innovation division conference in San Diego with the San Diego section of ASQ. And there's a lot of extremely fascinating discussions about this topic. And one of the things we strongly believe in HD&L generally is that use conflict. We can use conflict to help us innovate better and deal with complexity that is really marking all of our organizations and in society, and will continue to do so. We're not going to get rid of complexity in the workplace anytime soon. And it's such a powerful, powerful option. The problem is for all of us is that we can be afraid to deal with conflict. It's a messy thing, right? And so it's just a tool that's not used as much as others for creating better innovation. Also, another point there is gaining flexibility for more and better problem solving, and that's something that also is tagged on to what I was just discussing. Better problem solving means being a little bit more comfortable in a conflict situation in the workplace. Ultimately, learning how to deal with conflict, leading through conflict, is very positive, and people call it life affirming, and it certainly is that. And on the next slide, we show why it's so positive and life affirming, because the opposite is when we are in conflict. And we see that conflict can affect us tremendously, and I'd be interested to see your hands raised if you have experienced any of these kinds of things. Swirls of emotion, increased stress. If you were indeed in any kind of conflict, have you felt these things? And the hands are going up. You may have felt less productive. You may have had health issues come out of maybe a long-term, more protracted conflict situation. Loss of perspective is a big one, right? When we're in conflict, we really get internalized. We really start, it's all about me. It's all about my emotion. It's all about how I'm seeing the world. And that loss of perspective is a huge factor here. And we also get, isolated. So in that internalization, in that thinking about yourself more and more in this conflict, you lose the feeling of support and you feel really helpless. These things are, of course, so detrimental in the short term, but over a long period of time. And they can easily turn into a downward spiral. So these things can definitely lead to depression. And when it affects more than the individual, in a community, you can see the scale of this can just be even worse. And affecting society is just, it can grow to be a very, very difficult situation. So in terms of leading through conflict as a process, well, let's talk about the steps here. There are a range of approaches. So when you look at conflict, you can decide with intent and commitment that you will engage in this conflict. And that implies that you will be more proactive in how you will deal with the conflict. That's on one side of a conflict continuum. On the other side is non-engagement, being very reactive. So what are both of those sides in reality? Well, on the left side of the continuum where you're very engaging, that's collaborative negotiation. That's doing the planning to go into a conflict and learn something from it and solve something out of that conflict. On the other end is reactive or a non-engagement, and that's taking the thing to, say, a courtroom situation, having a judge decide the conflict outcomes for you. So as a mediator, I've sat in small claims court, which for learning and experience, which I don't recommend necessarily. It's a very interesting place, small claims court generally, but it's a great learning to understand people and maybe understand conflicts better. As you sit and look at people in small claims, if you talk with them, they will say, this is very engaging for me. I feel powerful in this, taking this conflict to a courtroom. In actuality, it is very, it's not empowering at all. You don't make the decision as opposed to the other side of this continuum. The judge is making the decision for you, whether you like that decision or not. And when you poll people coming out of small claims court, they recognize that. Even if they win in that sort of situation, they're actually not happy. When you poll successful mediations, people coming out of successful mediations, they are happy generally with what they have resulted in or what their outcome is. But it is definitely a fact that when you poll people coming out of small claims court, even if they win, there's some sense of disappointment. And that disappointment is because you don't have a say in the decision. You make your claim and you're done with, right? It's not so empowering of a situation. So preventing conflict, negotiating collaboratively, that's where we want to go. That's where Marilyn and I suggest that you go. And the start of this process, as we said, is self-awareness, and that's the start of the roadmap. So knowing the conflict style, beginning to see your stereotypes with the generations that Marilyn spoke of. The last point on this slide is to recognize, there are intractable conflicts, right? There are conflicts that you will choose not to be involved with, and that's fine. So because the difference is that you're choosing. It's not the same as I have in parentheses there, stewing over a conflict. You're engaged. You're still entangled in that conflict if you're stewing in it, right? But you may choose not to engage. For example, an example of this in the little town I live in, there's a person who is homeless on the street and very aggressive. And whenever you walk by that person, they're really going to pick on you. Somehow they'll bring up, I don't know, they'll just blurt out that, you look terrible today. Your hair is the ugliest hair I've ever seen in my life. So, this just happens to everybody who walks by this person. I'm not going to engage in that with that person and start reasoning with them. Well, I have spent half an hour on my hair. Right? It's not going to go anywhere for me to get embroiled in that kind of conflict. But I choose not to do that, right? So, so there is a difference as we look in depth at the roadmap. There are many decision points, and that's a decision. Am I going to engage here or not? Do I need anything from the relationship? Do I have an interest in the relationship? Does the other party have an interest to be in this relationship with me, even at a minimum, type of relationship or acquaintanceship? And so on the next slide, we talk a little bit more about this process. So we talk about interest-based, and there are two ways to go here, right? And many of you who have read about this or had some training in it do know the difference between an interest-based negotiation style than a positional-based style. There's been a lot of discussion about this. And in interest-based, we are saying that even though a lot of people in the world see a zero-sum game, see a gain and a loss in any sort of conflict, in interest-based, that's not true. Reality is not a zero-sum game. There's enough for everyone because your interests are very important to the process. So the common example of this is to say Marilyn and I want an apple or an orange. So we're in conflict now. We both want, there's one orange there, and we both want it. So if I took a position, my position is I want that, Marilyn. And Marilyn, if she took a position, would be, well, Carolann, I want that orange. I want it. Okay, and we're kind of stuck there. How much can we say that we want the orange? But to be more interest-based, I have to drag myself out of my own perspective and say, well, Marilyn, why do you want the orange by chance? Could you explain to me why you want that orange?
Well, I'm hungry, Carolann.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes everything because I am not hungry. I want the orange too, but I want the outside of the orange I'm a baker. In reality, I am a baker, and I would love to use the rind for baking. Something with the orange rind. I have no desire to eat the orange. I don't like oranges. And the thing is becoming all of a sudden a solution, only because I took a step and shifted out of my position and said, well, okay, well, what's your interest in this, Marilyn? What do you really want it for? And if Marilyn asked me that same question, I would be showing her my interest, and we would both realize, wow, boy, we don't have a conflict at all. We're okay here. We've solved this. And that's why, in a lot of conflicts, we are told that it's not about you, or we're told not to, it's not, you don't put your interest on the table. Well, but in collaborative negotiation, you certainly do. Go ahead, put your interest on the table. We want to know what you really need out of this. So there's a big difference in interest and positions. And we talked a little bit about innovation and how, well, okay, what's the definition of innovation? It's having a new idea. It's originating something. Excuse me. Excuse me. And so use conflict to be fuel for your idea. So we're not saying go find a conflict and embroil yourself in it. Of course, I don't go asking for conflict in my workplace, but I'm very comfortable with it if it does happen, and I don't try to avoid it or placate it. And some of you may have been in a meeting, actually, and I know Marilyn and I have talked about this. Some facilitators will actually try to do this, right? Marilyn, have you experienced this when you were sitting in a meeting where people are just, it's too uncomfortable for them and they want to avoid it, right? Even if the facilitator tries to avoid it.
Oh, yes.
So avoiding conflict, again, if it's, maybe that's a way to go, but a lot of times in our workplaces, it's not the way to go, and it can get you to a greater place of innovation. So Marilyn and I suggest diving in and exploring this conflict to grab potential. And in the council world, in Native American and many tribal practices have a council-type practice where it's a circle decision-making body in the tribe, and that circle or council reaches decisions in a very unusual way, and they talk about turning into this skid. That means they're going to go to a place that's uncomfortable. They're going to go there and see what happens. They're going to play in that space, in other words. And so we're saying let's explore. Let's be a human explorer in this, and see what kind of positive and practical things come out of it. And it's the same. I draw a lot of analogy to leadership. It's the same as when we decide I'm going to be a leader, a better leader, and I'm going into this leadership journey. And so I'm going to explore this. I'm going to be a human explorer in leadership, and it's a very kind of similar process. So we've talked about, as an individual, going into a conflict, but what about we're in a workplace and we have teams to deal with, whether we like that or not. And so how do we extend this to concept to teams and team conflict? Well, one of the models that we use is from Patrick Lencioni, if you're familiar with his work. And one of the books he did was actually entitled The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And his model is up there on the screen, and it's a triangle model. And he's looked at what he thinks the top 5 dysfunctions of all teams are. And we use this model ourselves to frame how we look at team conflict. Forming, storming, norming, performing is another model that we probably all know pretty well. That's been around. We've heard about it. However, in my experience, what I've found that's interesting about that model is that it hinders the restorming aspect sometimes. So I have been in teams that feel that they've gone through all those stages. They're in the performing stage, and they're afraid to go back and storm too much. They're afraid to bring up conflict because they don't want to go through that model again. It was painful in the first place, and they don't want to go backwards. That's how they see it. And so that's kind of interesting, and they feel hindered about in terms of dealing with conflict in the team. So when you look at this triangle, you see at the very bottom there's absence of trust. That's certainly that's a big dysfunction, and it's at the bottom because it also informs these other dysfunctions. So the fear of being vulnerable with your team members means that you will have less trust within that team, means that you might get into conflict more quickly with that team. Above that is actually fear of conflict, what we've been talking about. So Lencioni finds this as a major dysfunction of the teams that he works with, and that's true. So what that means is you want to preserve an artificial harmony within that team or the meeting, right? But what happens then is that you'll really stifle productive conflict from happening. Above the fear of conflict is lack of commitment. So that's lack of the clarity or buy-in that prevents the people on the team from making decisions they will stick to. Again, if you have a lack of trust, if you have a conflict you're avoiding in a team situation, likely you'll have people not committing, right? That's what we do. That's a human thing. It's same as the thing on top of that point of avoidance of accountability. If I don't trust, if I'm uncomfortable, there's interpersonal disharmony or a lack of communication, I'm certainly myself not going to jump out to be super accountable for anything, right? Finally, at the top of that triangle is, again, something I bet we've all faced, is this inattention to results. So if I'm in a conflict, we talked about, that becomes my world of my own emotions and my stance and perspective on things, I'm certainly going to erode the focus on a collective team success at that point, right? So so that's again a way to nice framing for taking some of the things as an individual conflict to a team. And I think, again, from Katzenbach and Smith, The Wisdom of Teams, which is an older book in 2003, but it's such a gem body of knowledge. And they talk about, well, hey, when you aren't able to solve a conflict, these are the things that you feel as a team. And yeah, I think we can all safely say, I will assume that we've all had that situation, at least one of these points, if not all of them, where we felt helpless, where there's just been a real loss of energy in the team dynamics. There's finger pointing, especially finger pointing at people who aren't actually in the room, right? And interpersonal attacks, a lot of cynicism. So these kinds of things are death warrants for productive teams, right? And creativity and innovation. So we go back to, on the next slide, we're talking about, again, the power of practice and how, it does, we can talk about this, but when you start to do it, it's it takes some commitment and intent. And so I think I'll turn this back to Marilyn at this point to talk about the retreat and how we're forming the way that we teach this and facilitate this topic. Marilyn, you ready to take over again?
I am. Thanks, Carolann.
Okay.
So it's interesting what Carolann has just taken us through. As you think about leading through conflict, the one thing you need to be able to do it well is practice. It's very easy to read a book. It's very easy to go to a short seminar like this one and get the overview of how you deal with conflict. But we're talking about behaviors that are well entrenched, and until you start actually practicing on how to do things differently, it's very difficult to start leading yourself and your teams through conflicts. So as we developed this retreat, this was one of our important guiding principles, that there would be a lot of practice in this day and a half retreat. There will be demonstrations, role play by Carolann and myself. There will be group practices. There'll be small dyad type practices and role plays. We're going to ask you to personally reflect. We're going to take you through the Kilman instrument for defining your individual conflict style so that you can say, wow, naturally speaking, I like to avoid conflict. How would I like to practice to do something differently? Or if you're like me and you're a reflective type person, wow, if you're being aggressive with me, I'm going to be aggressive with you. Maybe I might like to take a different approach than that. And so we're really going to be, it's going to be all about the actual practice of these principles. As we teach them to you, we go deep into the practice on it. And this is our inaugural session in Trinidad, and I'm very excited to announce that for those of us who can't talk our management into going to Trinidad to take a course like this, we're also going to be offering it in San Diego in conjunction with the San Diego section in April of 2017. So please keep an eye out for that date coming across in the newsletters and our other HD&L communication devices. The seminar, the retreat is, as I said, a day and a half, and you will be practicing most of the time, but you'll also walk away with self-assessments, workbooks, worksheets, tools, and this is very exciting, a personal roadmap through conflict, which you'll build throughout the course, and you'll essentially identify what kinds of tools and issues you want to focus on as you bring your practice forward outside of the retreat into your life, into your workplace. But one of the things we think makes this seminar unique is that we're not going to end after a day and a half. We're also going to conduct 3 webinars over the next 3 months where we will regroup and talk about how you're doing and explore other topics. Because while a day and a half seems like a long time, honestly, there's so much more we can talk about. So we're very excited about that aspect of the work, the follow-up webinars that we're going to be doing. Some of the benefits, I'm not going to go through all of these, but let me pick out a couple of my favorites. And certainly one of the biggest things that I love about this course is turning conflict from something that's like kind of spooky and scary into something that's valuable. And I think that's really a great source of innovation, because when you start exploring conflict and thinking about how to overcome it, as Carolann said before, this is where you really start to get ideas about doing things differently and in a new way, and that's innovation. I would like to really also highlight the fact that we're going to focus on individual and team conflicts. I don't know about you, but as I do my practice, I often have to deal with difficult teams, whether it's my own work team or whether it's a project team. And so we're going to focus, the second day is going to be all about that. Here's kind of a high-level view of what you'll get in the course. We'll actually get to you before the course with some worksheets and some reading so that you can come in and hit the ground running. In the first day, we're really going to focus, get you started on your roadmap. We're going to talk about your personal conflict style, and we'll talk about stereotypes and unspoken assumptions, how that deals with conflict. In the afternoon, we'll really get into practicing with the conflict resolution tools. And this is going to, one reason we call it a retreat is we want to go outside the class and really talk about what we learned, and that we can do that at the team dinner that will happen on the first day. And then on the second day, we're going to focus around leading through conflict with teams. And as I mentioned before, over the next 3 months, we'll get together on a regular basis to talk more about how you're doing, what questions do you have, and additional topics of mutual interest. So we also want to utilize, if possible, that second half of the second day. We don't like to waste any time, and so we're offering 10 slots in an additional session that will directly follow the retreat. And this is we're reducing the exposure from 20 people to 10 people, and we'll be able to dig in more on your own personal roadmap and get some more one-on-one time with Carolann and myself. So if you're interested in registering for the course in Trinidad, or if you want to contact Carolann and I because you're interested perhaps in the one in San Diego, here's our contact information. The offering in Trinidad is December 27th and 28th, and it's right before Carnival, so if you can get to Trinidad, that's a really great time to go there. And as Wanda told you at the beginning, we do have our website, which is just chock full of information, but if you use this particular link, you can go directly to the information on the class, and the registration buttons are there as well. You'll notice that there's a handout on your panel for GoToWebinar. There's a section that says handouts, and if you would like to, you can download the document there simply by clicking on it, and that will give you some information about the course as well that you can take away today. We're recording the session today, and the recording of this will be on the website as well. So there are lots of ways you can get in touch with us. Again, you can contact me at mmonda@mondaconsulting.net or carolwolfgang@gmail.com. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I clicked on the link by mistake. Okay, so please, I hope you can join us. We really want to, we're inspired, we're passionate, and we hope that you are interested in this topic as well. And we can also take your questions now if you're interested. We still have 20 minutes left in our hour and a half. And yes, someone has asked, Lori has asked about the pricing for the workshop. If you go to the website, you'll find all the pricing there. Anyone else have any questions or comments for us? Okay, well, Brooks, Wanda, is there anything that you'd like to add at the end of this session? I think you're on mute. Carolann?
Hi. No, thank you everyone for spending this time with us and just spending the time and coming in with us this morning means that you are committed to learning more, and it's certainly appreciated. And yeah, and we hope that you'll join us for facilitating this dialogue further. And we'd love to hear, if you have any questions, or love to hear any stories that you have to share with us as well. We're all on the journey together, so we do appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, so much. And Carol, Brooks, do you want to say anything about the survey before we close? Perhaps not. Okay.
Maybe we lost those guys.
Yeah.
Marilyn, this is Wanda. There will be a survey that everyone will receive about the webinar, and it should be coming shortly after this, and we would really appreciate your feedback to help us be able to improve these. And I just really want to thank Marilyn and Carolann for your time, effort, and passion around this topic, because I think it's one of important interest for today and for our future as we move forward. So thank you guys so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll end the webinar now. Thanks. Bye-bye.